my name is Michele KARMARTSANG. I'm a library assistant at the St. Helens Public Library, here to welcome you to LAWNCHAIR Reads for Genealogists. We regret that we're unable to meet in person right now. However, I hope that you'll find some interesting takeaways from this presentation I'm about to give. As genealogists, we're fairly used to using books in our genealogical research. However, what I'm here to talk about is using books as recreational genealogy. As genealogists, we have a natural interest in family stories, historical stories, and sometimes using historical fiction and other types of genealogical work, it can kind of help us fill in some broad strokes as far as history and in understanding experiences of other people. We read to help us understand ourselves and our past, and we can use both fiction and nonfiction to play that role. We often wonder what life was like for our ancestors at different points in history. For myself, a couple of the periods of time that I've delved into was the American Revolution and the Huguenot when the Huguenots fled from Europe. So I looked to some historical fiction to help fill in some understanding of how people may have experienced those periods in time. Some of the pitfalls when you're using reading to maybe fill in some of those blanks is you may find out that a book isn't as true to history as you had hoped. It may have accurate, real people, but the history just doesn't add up. And so it may provide some broad strokes, but not so much information about that specific period or person that you're looking for. Another thing that can happen is that you have a time period that there just hasn't been a lot written about. And sometimes you find a book that just isn't that good, and that can be disappointing. When we look at historical fiction, there are a few different ways that that can turn out. You may have a made-up character placed in a very well-researched history. You may have a real-life character who's been given a very rich but entirely made-up story. And you can also find books where you have real people in historically accurate tellings. And that, for me, is the best of both worlds, but there's still something that can be taken away from those other types of stories. So, you know, it's all good. Some ideas on branching out. You may want to try reading something in a different genre than you're used to. You might try a graphic novel. I have a couple of graphic memoirs here that are very compelling. You might read something from the young adult or juvenile category and find that it's just as compelling and fully fledged as any other category. You might try an ebook, an e-audiobook, or a book on CD if it's not available in the library in hard copy. Then there are other ways that we can help you get a hold of books that will touch upon the time period in which you're looking for. And another thing you might try is reading a book simply because the author shares an ancestral name from your family tree. I've done that and I've been pleasantly surprised and disappointed. So just for fun, it can be a thing that you might want to do. And as always, please check with library staff if you need help finding a book about any time period, or person, or any topic really. We'd be happy to help you find what you're looking for. So what I've brought is some of my reading that I've done over the past few years that touch on a couple of different areas. One is genetics and finding family. The next one is historical times and places. And then lastly, I want to share with you some new and coming soon titles. So first up, in genetics and finding family, I'd like to share a brief history of everyone who ever lived, the human story retold through our genes by Adam Rutherford. And I have to say that the title and subtitle really encapsulate what this book is about. I listened to this one on audio, and I found it to be very informative and humorous, and it does really span the breadth of history. Next, I have Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and love by DANI SHAPIRO. This book came out with a lot of fanfare about a year ago. DANI SHAPIRO found out through an innocently taken DNA test that she was donor conceived. And this rocks her understanding of her place in her very Jewish family, as her donor father is not Jewish, and she had a very close relationship with her father, whom she believed to be her father her entire life. And she describes the pain and her search for answers very, very movingly. And anyone who is a non-paternal event under any circumstances could definitely find something in this book that resonates. Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. This is a fictional telling of a situation that did happen in the American South, wherein an adoption agency stole children from poor families and sold them to rich families for adoption. This took place post-Depression, and there is a nonfiction book that accompanies this one. It is called Before and After by Judy Christie and the author Lisa Wingate. Next up is The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek by Michele Richardson. This book could fall under either historical places and times or the genetics and finding family, but I'm putting it in genetics and finding family because it does deal with the genetic influences on the Blue people of Kentucky that is told within the era-appropriate understanding, or more accurately, misunderstanding, as well as being a very moving and historic account of the WPA era pack horse librarians. Next is A Village with My Name, A Family History of China's Opening to the World by Scott Tong. This one is an American journalist who, while he is posted in Shanghai, he takes the opportunity to reconnect with the family that his parents left behind when fleeing the communists in 1950s. The history of China is told basically from both sides of the world, as well as the family history. And then here's a great example of a graphic novel. This is Hey Kiddo by Jarrett Krosaska. How I Lost My Mother, Found My Father, and Dealt with Family Addiction. And this is a young adult graphic novel, and it tells about Krosaska growing up knowing very little about his biological father, and it movingly expresses the longing and the questions he had, as well as describing the difficulties that he had in forging a relationship with that father as a young adult. And I think there's a lot to identify with there for people who may have reached out and met family through DNA or building ancestry trees to help find lost relatives. I think it does a great job of really expressing those feelings of loss and the difficulties of relationship building. Moving on to historical and place-based stories. If you're not already familiar with Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series, this series covers a wide span of history through time travel. While that part of the story is rather magical, the research that Gabaldon puts into the history is solid, from Culloden all the way through to the American Revolution. Next up is The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Speare, which you may have read as a child. It's a Newbery Award-winning children's book set in 1687 that illustrates pre-revolutionary life and the tensions between the Puritans and the Quakers. Indigo Girl by Natasha Boyd is a great example of a story in which historical fiction does an excellent job of telling the story of a real person with the historical accuracy. This is pre-revolutionary South Carolina, wherein Eliza Lucas is placed in charge of her family's 3 plantations while her father pursues his military ambitions. She struggles to be taken seriously as she transitions to growing indigo. It is historically accurate, and it is based on documents and Eliza's personal letters. The Cooking Gene, A Journey Through African American Culinary History in the Old South by Michael W. Twitty, is a book that not only explores the African influence on America's foods and history, but also takes a dive into African American DNA, ancestry, and family lineages as well. It's written by a Black, Jewish, gay, modern American, so it really kind of hits everything from the very beginning of our country to what life is like here now. Today We Go Home by KELLI ESTES is a story that ties together a found Civil War diary in which a woman passed as a man in order to fight with the story of a female Iraq war veteran experiencing PTSD. It is based on stories of real life disguised as men veterans who fought in the Civil War and has some harrowing depictions of PTSD both then and now. The Wind Called My Name by Mary Louise Sanchez. I don't have a copy of it here to show you because I did purchase this on Amazon. It's a juvenile book that was recommended to me by my DNA found cousin, and it was written by her cousin. This story is about a Hispanic family with centuries-deep roots in Colorado who, due to the economic realities during the Great Depression, moved to Wyoming, where they meet both kind people and experience some racism as they build their new lives. Next up, I have Belonging, A German Reckons with History and Home by NORA KRUG. This is a graphic novel, and this is a lovely example of memoir in graphic novel. If you have post-war World War II German roots, or if you're interested in the psychological aftermath of World War II for the German people, this moving graphic memoir tackles this on a family level. It almost reads like a family mystery because people were very unwilling to talk about what their families either did or did not do during the war. So there is that. And then lastly, here's another kind of personal story to share. This is The Keys to the Cottage, Stories from the West of Ireland by Carlos Reyes. This is an example of finding out that you have relatives who are writers. This is written by a close DNA relative of mine, wherein he reflects on his Irish heritage and therefore my Irish heritage, while describing the place and the folk who were his friends and neighbors while he lived in Ireland and kept a cottage there. And lastly, new and coming soon. I'd like to share with you a series that Sue LeBlanc requested for the library, and we have purchased the first 4 in the series. This is the first book, Hiding the Past, Genealogical Crime Mystery, by Nathan Dillon Goodwin. And this is the Forensic Genealogy series that is in the mystery section of the library. And we have the first 4 books in the series. I'm getting into a place where I haven't read these books, so I'm giving some summaries based on what I can see. Next up is The Lost Family, How DNA Testing is Upending Who We Are by Libby Copeland. This has been in the news a lot lately. Copeland compassionately looks at the implications of DNA testing and how secrets are uncovered. And then she also looks and talks to a variety of people whom she calls seekers, and how they dealt with the information that they found. This one, this is a nonfiction. It's called Imprint, A Memoir of Trauma in the Third Generation by Claire SICHERMAN. It's not precisely about genealogy, but it does reflect on the author's ancestors, some of whom survived and some of whom did not survive the Holocaust. And it's a personal story about family history and generational trauma. This one kind of reminds me of the other book, Before We Were Yours. This one is called Lost Boy Found. This is a historical fiction. In 1913, when a child goes missing in Half Moon Lake, Louisiana, his parents spend 2 years offering increasingly large rewards trying to find him. But when the child is found with a tramp, another woman who is not as wealthy, claims the child. Now, I haven't read the book, but I did peek at the author's note, and it does state that the historical case was eventually proven by DNA in 2004. And then lastly, this is so new, one of the things that I'm doing at the library while we are closed is I have books at home that I help prepare for processing and for circulation. So this one caught my eye. It's called Finding Family, My Search for Roots and the Secret in My DNA by Richard Hill. And so I don't have a lot to say about it. It's so new, but we do have it, and it will be in the catalog and ready for everyone to read as soon as we're able to be open in whatever capacity and help get books into everyone's hands. So that is my talk. Thank you for listening. I'm not particularly accustomed to being in front of the camera like this, so I appreciate you sticking with me as I try to leap the hurdles of technology and my own mouth. And we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.